unpacking today's headlines. This is Souls and Liberty in Depth.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to In Depth, the production of Souls and Liberty. And we are here asking the question and sorting out the question of the charges that may or may not be brought against all of the deep state commie dem bastards that tried to overthrow the government. Is sure what all the information and the evidence is pointing to. And joining us here today is Ed Hubbard. Ed, how are you doing?
Good. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for being on. Ed is a constitutional lawyer, and I know sometimes it seems a little weird to have somebody else like read your accolades while you're sitting there kind of feeling weird that they're reading your accolades. So why don't you tell us some of your accomplishments, your CV, your resume, and so everybody knows that when you start talking, like, oh, this dude knows what he's talking about.
Sure. I've been practicing law in Houston and in courts across the country for 42 years and have specialized in mainly appellate law and complex commercial cases, including constitutional law. I've also was a Republican nominee for an appellate bench back in 2008. And have served 2 terms over the last 10 years as the legal counsel to the Harris County Republican Party. I've served in a number of capacities with the Republican Party here locally, but am today a member of the national board of what's called the National Federation of Pachyderm Clubs, which is a group that sponsors educational programs and clubs that support conservative and Republican causes.
I was going to say educational clubs that support elephants. Elephants are very smart, very intelligent creatures. All right, Ed. First of all, as I said earlier, when you're talking, you know what you're talking about. So. Let me just jump right into I think what is kind of the leading question right now in the midst of all this Russia hoax and 2020 election steal and the Steele dossier and all of it. It was really aimed at preventing Trump from getting elected in 2016, and then once elected in 2016, undermining him. And he himself now is throwing around the word treason a lot. Tulsi Gabbard, Director of National Intelligence, when she handed all that stuff over last week to Pam Bondi of the Justice Department, she used the word treasonous conspiracy and seditious conspiracy. Of sedition and treason, let's just start with those two. Which is the greater offense? I mean, can you be executed for sedition? Because you can be executed for treason.
It depends on the if sedition occurred during a time of war, then yes, because both the federal law as well as the military law could come into effect in a time of war. But let's back up for one thing.
Sure.
We've used the word treason a lot, and this is real important for people to understand. Treason is the only crime that is actually addressed in the U.S. Constitution. Mm-hmm. And it requires, and I brought my copy of my moth-eaten copy of the Constitution.
Good.
But the treason against the United States shall consist only in levying war against the United States or in adhering to their enemies, giving them aid and comfort. So let's look at treason. We may all have a lay understanding of treason, but that's the definition. And it also requires that there be 2 witnesses that confirm the act. And that's all in the Constitution. So let's look at what happened here. From what we can tell, this was a pre and post election meetings and emails and documents about how to undermine Trump. There was no war. There was no external enemy. So treason is off the table.
Okay.
So let's put that to the side and make sure that all our viewers are using the right words, no matter how mad we may be.
Sure.
When it comes to sedition, you've got a lot of words like sedition, rebellion, insurrection. We've heard these tossed around a lot over the last 10 years.
Sure.
And they basically can be terms where you're undermining the government. Typically, it involves some sort of conspiracy and some sort of violent act toward the government. You also have espionage, which we all know is basically spying against the government. And espionage has certain levels to that, depending on whether it's during a time of war or not. So, really what we're dealing here with is some really serious acts of political corruption in which one set of people were trying to undermine their political opponent and undermine their legitimacy once they took office. If you could argue this is seditious, it's not a rebellion, it's not an insurrection. It could be seditious, but that definition of sedition, which was attempted back in the late 1790s by John Adams and the Alien and Sedition Act.
Correct.
The government has always frowned on reading sedition that broadly. So but that's probably the closest criminal conduct to what we're seeing.
Would that be in your view the sort of the 60,000 foot charge, and then with a bunch of little details underneath? I mean, it's got to be. Well, I would think. I'm not an attorney. I just question them on TV. It would seem to me that it's got to be criminal to knowingly present false information to a court in hopes and actually at the end of the day, the granting of a warrant when it's based on the underlying information that is based on, is a lie. That it's not true. I mean, is that really not a criminal offense?
Yes, and let me go back to sedition for just a second, because sedition, back when the French Revolution and the Napoleonic period was starting, that's when that law was passed in the United States. And it's never been applied lawfully without some involvement of a foreign government or acting with a foreign government. So, and it was tried in around World War I as well, to be enforced. So we probably don't have criminal sedition because it does not look as though the Obama people worked in concert with any other foreign government. They weren't working. Their argument is they were working against Russia, not with it. So, so you've got probably not sedition, but the second thing you said is absolutely correct. Where I think the criminal action is going to come is if, in fact, three things are in existence. Number one, the people are not immune from prosecution. Number two, that we're within a statute of limitations for a crime. And number three, that the corruption they were involved with led them to commit a criminal act. And that would be, as you mentioned, that would be perjury.
Sure.
If they went in and they got a FISA warrant based on something they made up, that's perjury. If they went in and actually took, what started the Mueller investigation. Usually requires affidavits and filings with courts to get the special prosecutor up and going. That could be perjury. So the corruption here, I think they're going to have to look to see, do they have an actionable crime that was committed because of the corruption?
Okay, so that makes sense. So corruption, as kind of counterintuitive as it seems, or it is, corruption is not a crime. Is that correct? It's not something you could pursue, that Pam Bondi or whoever could pursue against any of these actors. There is no criminal act of corruption.
Right, in and of itself. We're all students of our government. If you go back to the Federalist Papers, this was discussed in the Federalist Papers. People can do bad things, and often do bad things when they're given governmental power.
Sure.
That's why we have checks and balances.
That's why we have a Second Amendment.
Rules. Exactly. But just being corrupt isn't criminal. You have to do, and just working in concert with other people to do corrupt things isn't criminal unless you actually engage in an underlying crime. And so our whole system of government is almost based on the assumption people sometimes will be corrupt. And so we set up a system of procedures and systems that are designed to keep that corruption from harming people.
Okay. Well, you lawyers, my goodness. So, you go to social media and all you see is arrest Obama, take them all to the gallows, blah, 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 and all this and everything. And I think that's pretty indicative of, Mark Mitchell, our good friend over at Rasmussen Polling, put out a poll, or the results of his poll earlier today, as a matter of fact. And that polling, he gave people 4 choices of how to treat government, how they view government. 65% said burn it all down. So, yeah. That's a pretty hefty number. And even if he's off by 10%, which Mark is never off by 10%, he's off by 1. But even still, it's a clear majority. And if Mark's numbers are true, which I have every reason to believe they are, 2/3 of Americans have this view of government that the entire thing is so freaking corrupt, person to person, up and down, committee, chairman, this, department, agency, whatever, just burn it all down. Now, obviously, you can't really burn it all down, but you can certainly go through with a sledgehammer and a flamethrower and some Agent Orange and do what you got to do to start fixing things. But is this the opportunity right now to go through and pull this stuff up by the roots as much as you can? And what would be the charge? For example, what would be the charge against James Comey, who in those December 8th and December 9th meetings in the transition after Obama was on his way out and Trump had beaten Hillary, what would be the charge against him for deliberately obfuscating on the presidential daily briefing and saying, we are not going to sign on that Russia didn't interfere in the election. We are going to say they did. And he knows what he's saying is a lie in that meeting, not what he may have said later in front of Congress under oath. I know it's legal stuff, so I'm trying to say it as best legally as I think most people would view it. It just seems like all this crap is criminal. You go into the Oval Office and you lie your ass off, and and you're presenting false information to a FISA court in order to get a warrant to spy on somebody. In this case, spy on Trump when he's still candidate Trump, and then undermine him. I mean, isn't undermining a sitting president a coup? That's not a crime.
I want to start with something you were saying a minute ago. I want to go through all that, but
sure.
Trust in my lifetime has been declining in government, and it seems like it's getting worse with every decade.
Oh, yeah.
When I was growing up, it was Vietnam and Watergate, and then you had Iran-Contra, and then you had, of course, everything that Bill Clinton did in his second term. And then you had no WMDs. And then we have had these last 10 years where it's just, dropped through the floor.
Oh, it's election theft. It's COVID. I mean, it just never stops. I mean, everything that comes out of these guys' mouths is a lie.
Exactly. And one of the things we don't yet know, and we may never know, is why we still have never seen the appendix to the Inspector General's report as to the reason Comey reopened the email investigation on the eve of the 2016 election. We've never seen that.
Right.
And, and this goes hand in hand with what you asked about Comey. I think Comey, Brennan, and Clapper have a problem. Number one, they aren't immune. They don't have the presidential immunity that Obama now enjoys. And what they did.
Let me hold you up right there for a moment, Ed, because
Sure.
I want to make sure I understand that, because obviously you're referencing the Supreme Court just helped out their ruling helped out Trump as far as presidential immunity and actions taken by the president. However, if the president of the United States knows something to be false and then instructs his underlings to go make up a report full of crap, he's immune from that decision, that action?
Let's compare, because there are two different scenarios.
Sure.
Let's compare two different scenarios. One is Nixon. Nixon knew that what he was doing with Haldeman and Ehrlichman was helping cover up a crime. And he was doing it in the Oval Office with two of his aides. But that type of crime was not within the core responsibilities of the president. Basically, he was pursuing his own election and covering up his own conduct.
Sure.
And the conduct of people working for his election. Obama, what the Supreme Court has said is that presidents are immune when they're involved in their core activity as president. Foreign relations and intelligence gathering is a core power of the president. And in carrying that out, basically he has immunity. Now, and it goes a little further in that even his communications with his underlings can't be used as evidence. So the question becomes against him.
Right.
So, all of that is immune. And he has the greatest protection. Had he been doing something like Nixon, he probably wouldn't be immune, or at least there'd be an argument for the government to go in and say he's not immune.
So let me hold you there for a moment, if I can. And I know there's so many of these details and things that it's hard for people who don't have their heads in this stuff every day, like we do, and you do, and lots of other people. So his handpicked, yay, let's vote for Hillary person had lost the election. She is now sort of sitting there on the sidelines. She was instrumental in Obama's mind to his view of how America should look and be. that's gone now because of Trump winning in 2016, is him joining in a process to undermine Trump when he knows it's a lie. He knew in those meetings back in August, before the election, that Hillary's play was the Steele dossier that her campaign had paid for through Fusion GPS, Christopher Steele, and all that business to drum up this incredibly false BS report, that Trump had prostitutes peeing on him in a hotel in Moscow, to name one ridiculous charge, accusation in it. He knows that's what she's going to be doing, and she does it, and he's all down with it. And he's doing that to advance. I'm trying to draw a comparison with the Nixon thing. Yeah, Nixon's kind of, it's for his reelection, granted, so it's more personal. However, what Obama is involved in here prior to the election and then during the transition is to keep his hands on control of all of this, of his worldview, and push it as much as possible. He tried to interfere in an election. I think the average person kind of runs into like the wall of like, how can that not be criminal? How can that action possibly how can he be immune from that? He deliberately tried to interfere in the outcome of an election. The fact that he wasn't successful doesn't mean anything. I mean, I guess this is where people are kind of running into it. Is there really just this whole kind of like legal labyrinth of all these kind of musty, weird types of readings of the laws and various rulings over 200 years, that how they get applied here and there, and there has to, you have to like swing a dead cat with your right hand facing Mecca on a Wednesday, or the law doesn't apply. All that stuff I think is lost on the average Joe. Just says, the dude lied and participated in, his handpicked successor's lying campaign strategy. He knew it was a lie. And then when it didn't prevent Trump from getting elected, then he went in, they shifted to plan B, which was, well, let's try to ruin him and get him impeached. I don't see how any of that is immune because he's sitting behind the resolute desk.
Well, everything you said was highly corrupt. Okay, let's all agree to that this, but political corruption in creating false information about your opponent goes back all the way to Jefferson versus Adams.
Sure.
Unfortunately,
but taking it to a court when it's a lie. I mean, they're officers of the court. They have a duty to tell the judge the truth.
That's the step that they're going to have to prove, because just helping Hillary pass around a false report, and then at the debate Hillary said all these people say you're helping Russia.
17 intel agencies.
Exactly. All of that isn't criminal. It's corrupt, but it isn't criminal. The criminal steps, if there are any that are actionable, really happened with what they did with that information later, when they went to the FISA court, when they went, and used it to start the Mueller investigation. Those type of things are where the criminal acts probably are. But just the pure corruption, unfortunately, the only way you fix that is at the ballot box.
Well, that's depressing.
Well, but if we're learning a lot that are going to inform us in future elections.
Sure.
We've learned so much about, this goes to this distrust we talked about.
Sure.
We're beginning to get to the source of the distrust. And if we can root this out, and with The Supreme Court over the last few years has been really pushing the idea of limiting the administrative state and its power and trying to return it to Congress. If we can kind of put all these puzzle pieces together, we can affect some real change.
Is there I think another thing that is so challenging, again, for just sort of, Joe Sixpack, looking at all of this, is there are so many individual corrupt acts, again, not criminal, that you could pursue the corruption, but there are all sorts of underlying actions that either were part of the corruption beforehand or flowed from the corruption. And there are so many of them. And ultimately, they are all tied. I mean, what's the big bow tie on all of this? Get Trump. That's the bow tie on everything. And there's so many various corrupt things going on and related potentially. I think there's, from what I've read anyway, I think there's a lot of criminal things that are actionable for criminal charges that flowed from the corruption. I think everybody gets that corruption. You can just be a corrupt person and that's not a crime. But if in the pursuit or the advancement of your corrupt stuff, you go rob a bank, well, now you have committed a crime. We're not going to charge you with corruption. We are going to charge you with bank robbery. So I think that distinction is pretty clear. And thank you for making that clear. I think some people are, a bit dumbfounded to say, really? Like, you can do all of this crap and, you can, draw up a phony report and do all of this and, and try to use it to undermine, interfere with an election. And then once the election doesn't go your way, then try to undermine the sitting president. None of that stuff is illegal. It's not a crime.
Well, let me do. I want to clarify one thing.
Sure.
If let's say Obama had only been a one-term president, and he left office, hasn't run again, but he's still out there, and we learn this stuff. There is some belief that he could be impeached for what he did, and that would bar him from ever running for office again. If he were convicted of the impeachment. The problem here is he did serve both terms.
Sure.
So there's no constitutional remedy for impeachment here because he can't be removed from office and he can't be barred from office because he's already barred from running for a third term.
Sure.
So, but there would be mechanisms to go after him if this had been learned sooner.
Correct.
As far as I do believe that, first of all, we're looking at a generation of people that have been involved in foreign affairs and intelligence gathering and law enforcement that should never serve in government again.
Correct.
Because of what they were involved with.
Absolutely.
And we now know who they are. And finally, as you said, it does appear that Comey and Brennan and Clapper and maybe others, Samantha Power, maybe some others.
Susan Rice. Yes,
Susan Rice. They may have committed criminal acts. The question then will become, is any action barred by the statute of limitations? And that's something that we'll just have to wait to see what the Justice Department comes up with.
That's my next question. I'm presuming that even prior to Trump's inauguration here for Trump 2.0, after he won, he had 4 years sitting on the sidelines with some pretty good people around him. I think it would be naive to think, and plotting is probably not the right word, but sitting, planning, observing, looking at, trying to figure things out, all that. If we win, how are we going to do this? How are we going to go after these people? And, who are they? And of course, they didn't have access to all the documents like they do now, like what Tulsi just released. But is there you got to imagine that there's a lot of midnight oil. There's a lot of people on like 24-hour shifts over at DOJ right now, and probably some gigantic workspace. Like, hey, I've got this form, and does that form fit into this one? Well, hey, look, this document supports this one, and the two of those together are a crime. I've got to imagine there's some kind of massive, planning session, like nonstop planning session over at DOJ. Like, how are we going to do this? I mean, you're an attorney. You've sat in those kinds of things, and what are they from a defense side and also a prosecution side? This is so high stakes. It's crazy. To the degree you can, why don't you give us a little like of a sort of inside baseball view of like what that sort of activity is like? What do you imagine things at the DOJ are like right now?
You've got a lot of people that have been charged with scouring the federal code to come up to see what may have been a violation. We all know perjury. We all can get, a conspiracy for perjury. We can guess at some other potential crimes, but that's what they're doing right now. They're trying to look at these documents, see what behavior is evidenced in the documents, and then looking at the code to see if there are crimes that can be charged based on this behavior. Now, remember this, in the old story about how they got Al Capone. They didn't get him for murdering people. They got him for tax evasion. So, here, if there are actionable crimes that survive the statute of limitations, we may all be surprised at what the charge is, but it could be that something in there raises a crime that they can still go after. Yeah, but we'll just have to see at this point.
It's kind of funny. As you're saying that, Ed, I'm thinking to myself, maybe Pam Bondi should reach out to Letitia James and Alvin Bragg and say, hey, can you find some minor little piece of crap over here and all of a sudden turn it into a felony?
Well, you raise an interesting issue because each state's criminal law is different. They criminalize different things, and the statute of limitations are different. We could find that some of these guys engaged in a state crime, although that would be very hard to do against a federal official. Typically, that has to be done under federal law.
Sure.
But you've got I'm sure, a strike force that's been appointed, and they're burning the midnight oil, looking at the law and the documents to see if there's something there.
And what exactly is a strike force? It sounds like, either a video game or some real cool SWAT movie or something from 20 years ago. What exactly is a strike force? It's just a team of investigators, right? Or is there some other thing to it?
That's really what it is.
Okay.
I mean, they're calling it a strike force, but basically what they're going to assemble is a team of lawyers and legal assistants within the Justice Department that's dedicated to this assignment. And they may be people all in the Washington office. They may be people spread out in different offices with different tasks. But there's essentially going to be a war room set up.
Sure.
They have a conference room. They're going to have all this stuff in the conference room. And this group is going to be working on all the different issues until they come up with some resolution. And my hope is, even if there is not an indictment, maybe they can have a limited appointment of a special counsel at some point to issue a final report. Because typically prosecutors cannot issue reports if there's no indictment, but a special counsel can. And even if there's no actionable crime, the statute of limitations have passed, whatever, I think the American public needs to be able to put this, understand what happened here and put it to rest.
Yeah, it is. So as you sit here today, knowing what you know from what's been released, and not necessarily all the media reports of it, or even the social media influencers, because many of them are kind of like all over the map on this, and it's a lot of conjecture. As a constitutional attorney, among other notable achievements in your life, do you expect indictments to come down? What would the indictments be for, and who would be indicted?
If there are criminal charges, I believe they will arise from how the product of this corruption was used during the first 6 months of 2017 to influence not only the FISA courts, but the beginning of the Mueller investigation, as well as testimony before congressional committees. Based on that, I believe what we're going to see is, if it is still pursuable, you're going to see perjury be the primary vehicle to go after these people. And one of the things you got to remember is Comey and Brennan and Clapper have all continued to testify before other committees since this time. Mm-hmm. And so I'm sure they're going to scour that testimony, because it may be that some of the perjury that has flowed from all of this occurred within the statute of limitations period that they can go after. It could be perjury in front of Congress. But those are the type of things that I think are going to happen. I do not believe you're going to see sedition as a charge, simply because the courts have really not wanted that to be a crime when it's outside of aiding a foreign enemy. And I don't think you're going to see a RICO charge because of the way Supreme Court has limited political corruption cases. So I think it's going to be some type of perjury charge.
An Al Capone tax evasion charge.
Exactly.
Well, he rotted and died in jail, or close to it, so fair enough. I guess people should put their nooses away for the time being, is what you're saying.
Well, no. One thing I hope people do take from this, and this is why I hope there's a final report that ties this up with a bow, is that we've really got to be vigilant as voters in the future and clean this mess up. And so I'm saying, don't stop being mad, but realize that we're only going to fix this if we keep these bums out of office in the future.
Yeah, and that I get it, and certainly, look, the law is the law, and whatever the constraints are there, well, maybe we should be grateful for the constraints, although the Biden administration completely disregarded them. If there is here we are, and the only thing that we can get is, again, the Al Capone tax evasion thing. I mean, that just leaves like sort of such a bad taste in people's mouths that they really didn't get what was coming to them, which raises my next question to you. What is a coup legally? Is there a crime of cooing? And if there is, does what has been engaged in here by essentially the whole, I mean, coup is a pretty broad term. 2016 prevent him from getting elected. 2017 takes the oath. Now try to ruin his presidency, actually to get him impeached and removed from office based on things that you knew were lies. 2020 comes along and you steal the election. All of that. Is there such a crime as trying to commit a coup against the government? Is that a crime?
Well, I can honestly say I'm not aware of a federal statute that uses the word coup. Remember, that's a French term.
Sure.
I believe that sedition is probably the closest we have. And as I said before, the Alien and Sedition Act has really been limited to working with the federal government. You do have situations in our past. Aaron Burr was tried. If you remember, he tried to overthrow the government, have a rebellion against it, and he was tried and acquitted. And he was out of office at the time when that happened. You have obviously the insurrection that was our Civil War, and you have the 14th Amendment dealing with certain consequences of engaging in insurrection. But the problem with defining a coup is, remember Mitch McConnell said years ago that he wanted to make Obama a failed president. That was his goal as senator. Is that a coup? I mean, where do you draw the line of what is political opposition and fierce political opposition and corrupt political opposition?
Sure.
In a coup? And that's one reason that the courts have been very leery about ever enforcing the Alien and Sedition Act, because what's one man's sedition is another man's, tough politics.
Well, okay, so let me
go
ahead.
Let me
play devil's advocate there. So, in Mitch McConnell's case, or in a case like that, where you're trying to just launch fierce political opposition, you're pulling green cards on various nominees for the federal courts or whatever it is you're doing. You're pulling every lever of power that you have to try to prevent a sitting president's policies from being enacted. Okay. And is it fierce? Absolutely. Might you make up stories and go tell your friends in whatever media operation? Sure. You know those stories you're telling them are lies? Sure. Okay. Move over to the Obama situation, where Obama et al., they're not trying to thwart his policies. They're lining up lies and false documentation to have him impeached and removed from office. That's not a failed presidency. That's a criminal presidency. To me, it seems like those are two different types of things. This is all part of the game. You can do all this kind of like, hey, we hate Obamacare. We're going to do everything we can to make sure it doesn't happen. We're going to, call a recess, or, make everybody stay behind, or, not have a quorum, whatever. All those different mechanisms you have to screw up the advancement of a sitting president's policies. And they're there for a reason, so you don't have like a monarchical presidency. I mean, sometimes they're good for you and sometimes they're not. On balance, that's what it is. But when you're over here and you're actually trying to get him removed from office based on what you know are lies and false documentation and bad representations to the court and all of that, which then spawn off spying and everything, that to me seems like two different worlds. Am I just not legally savvy enough with that? And if that's the answer, that's the answer.
Yeah, let's go back to another Nixon example.
Sure.
Where he created and helped spread a false rumor about the sitting Federal Reserve Chairman in hopes that he could create a situation where he could fire that chairman. There have been situations like that throughout history.
Sure.
That happens, and yes, it's corrupt, but it's not criminal unless it is, you go further and commit a crime as part of this conduct.
Sure.
And what we don't know yet from these documents that have now been uncovered is what Obama continued to do both before the inauguration of Trump and after the inauguration of Trump to further this, what he had put in motion, and did he have any knowledge and involvement of pushing this information in sworn testimony? I mean, and we don't know yet what these people intended to do with this information and how they intended to undermine Trump in December and January. We knew they wanted to undermine him, but we didn't know how far they'd take it. And so I think we all kind of have to take a deep breath and see what is really uncovered, because it's really what happened in April, May, June, July of 2017 that became the criminal acts. And we just have to see, if there are criminal acts.
So, Ed, from a legal strategy standpoint here, from the Department of Justice, if the strike force in the big, bullpen, the big giant conference room, is going through all these documents and lining everything up and putting the whole timeline together and says, oh, there's a crime by Clapper, there's a crime by Obama, there's a crime by crime. But the statute of limitations on those has run out. Would it be a good strategy seems to me it would, to haul every one of them in front of Congress now, put them under oath, and then one of two things is going to happen. They don't want to expose themselves, and perjure themselves, so they tell the truth. And they say, yeah, this was all a giant conspiracy to keep, to destroy Trump. Now, that's not a crime, as we've said, but it's out of their own mouths and everybody hears it. Or they perjure themselves, and their attorneys, or their private attorneys, are going to say, uh-oh, you don't want to expose yourself like that, because they're asking that question in such a way to make you perjure yourself. Is that where this is going to go? I mean, would that be an effective strategy on the part of the Department of Justice?
I'm going to get to that. Let me preface it this way. My guess is that the most likely scenario, if the statute of limitations bar any criminal action, is that there is going to be a way in which the Justice Department issues its own report and discloses all of the key information. In fact, I wouldn't be at all surprised, I mentioned this earlier, that you'll see eventually the Inspector General's report about what Comey did with the Hillary emails eventually get declassified and produced. Now, I also expect, if there's a report, and even if there isn't, Congress will, especially if it stays in Republican hands, will go after this once the Justice Department is done. They'll bring these people in. They'll try to get testimony from them.
And every one of them is going to plead the fifth.
That's what I was going to say. And we're already seeing this with the Biden
with the auto pen thing.
Investigation.
Yeah.
They're coming in and pleading the fifth. So, but that will also instruct the American people. Why are these people pleading the fifth? The statute of limitations is passed, all this stuff. Why are they pleading the fifth? And it would be an educational moment.
Again, it just seems kind of like a Pyrrhic victory. There's like so many, as opposed to like, hey, march them to the gallows because that's what they deserve. Well, now we're going to like take away their lunch money. That's what it feels like.
Yeah, it is. But think about this. One of the positive things about our political system is that as bad as it's gotten over 200 and some years, none of our presidents have gone to jail, unlike what happens in other countries. We've kind of kept, the criminal law at arm's length, no matter how bad things have gotten. And so there is a positive side to that. Just think of how bad it would be if we threw everybody in jail all the time.
Well, I think if you'd get rid of the corruption.
Well, but that would create its own corruption. That's the problem. Is look at the lawfare against Trump over the last 8 years.
Right.
That's a form of that corruption.
Sure it is. Do you on the question of pleading the fifth? This isn't. I mean, it's all part of one big giant coup. So, but specifically to the auto pen scandal and all, and they keep hauling every one of these kind of lesser known, important players, but not really, dining room table names in most American households. And all like pleading on the instruction of my attorney, I am going to plead the Fifth Amendment. Blah blah. Okay. So Congressman Byron Donalds did a little impromptu press conference, a reporter scrum, really, after one of the hearings, and where everybody taken the fifth. People involved with the auto pen, approving it, issuing the orders for it, all of that. And he said in that little reporter scrum, he said, hey, you know what? We should bring Kamala Harris in here. We should bring Joe Biden in here. Obviously, practically every American who breathes knows those two names. You talk about instructive and, put them there and, how many meetings were you in every day? Madam Vice President, you didn't see any of this at all? Did anyone ever approach you and say, I think he's dementia-ridden? You heard no conversations like that at all during, say, the last 2 years of his presidency. Nothing, zero. Really, can you imagine Kamala Harris taking the fifth on that?
Well, that would be an interesting hearing, because oftentimes when they try to bring in people from high positions in the executive department, they're going to claim executive privilege, okay, over their meetings and discussions with the president. But in this situation, Kamala Harris had a constitutional responsibility under the 25th Amendment to assess the president and to make a decision whether or not to trigger the 25th Amendment. Same with the other cabinet members. So they would have a hard time claiming executive privilege or the Fifth Amendment, because there's no crime involved, to those questions. I think it would be very interesting to see how that would unfold if Congress were to choose to do that.
And Byron Donalds is on that. He's a fine congressman. He's on that committee. He's on that House committee. I think it might be, I can't remember. I think it's the Judiciary Committee. I might be wrong on that. But whatever committee he's on, they're the ones interrogating and asking these questions and getting, plead the fifth, plead the fifth, plead the fifth, as their responses. And it, of course, is up to the chairman of that committee to decide whether subpoenas would be issued for Kamala and Jill. I think Jill would be there's no crime. It's not, hey, you didn't want people to know your husband was a vegetable. I mean, I'm pretty sure that's not anywhere in the federal code, in the U.S. code anywhere. So why would you plead the fifth? But if you did plead the fifth, and they both pleaded the fifth, I mean, I think that becomes that's an open and shut case. And if they do tell the truth, well, hey, that's all the better.
Well, and it's certainly, you could argue, I mean, as a lawyer, you can argue almost anything, but I could see the argument why some of these people who work directly for Biden and even Jill Biden could come in and claim executive privilege, or the Fifth Amendment makes no sense to me, but they could claim executive privilege for their testimony. But Congress has the right of oversight to determine whether or not the 25th Amendment is working and whether or not a new amendment needs to be made. That's right within their power. And so to call in the people who have to make that decision and have them testify, I don't see how that would be privileged, because they have to continually make an assessment under that an amendment that the president is functional. And so I think that would be a brilliant stroke, and let's see what happens if she were to be called in. But I think you could argue the whole cabinet needs to come in.
Well, that's what I was going to say. Bring in all, 17, I believe, cabinet members. Yeah. Bring in Kamala Harris. Bring them all in, and pleading. I mean, what's your executive privilege? And if somebody says, "Oh, I'm not going to testify, this is executive privilege," well, who is that the end of it, or is there another door to pass through to say, "Well, you don't get to claim executive privilege because I'm the authority that says you can't claim it"? Is that the case? And if it is, who would that be?
It would go to the courts. In fact, if you remember, the Judge Bozeman. We're going back to the Nixon era, but executive privilege was hotly discussed by the courts and ultimately the U.S. Supreme Court.
Sure.
Nixon tapes. So it would go to the courts. Congress would have to find them in contempt. It would go to the courts. And then, there would be a decision made by the courts to enforce the subpoenas. But again, I do believe that the strongest argument would be congressional oversight over the 25th Amendment.
Correct.
That would be very interesting.
Yeah, I think it's the world of politics. It is always shifting and undulating, isn't it? It's crazy. Ed Hubbard, thank you very, very much for coming on. Great insights. It's all this, we like here at Souls and Liberty to make sure that people understand the way things actually are. I get a bit hyperbolic every now and then, like, hey, start building the gallows. But if I have to be satisfied with an Al Capone tax evasion thing, and whatever, oh well, okay. I guess the largest thing is just the truth of all of this actually come out.
Right.
So if there's individuals that happen to evade jail time or prison time, it won't be the first miscarriage of justice, but at least the truth would have been served in the process. So, Ed Hubbard, thank you very, very much for coming on. Appreciate it very much, man. Thank you.
Thank you for inviting me. I enjoyed it. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, and that wraps us up for this edition of In Depth here at Souls and Liberty. I'm your host, Gary Monklevorse, coming to you from Houston, Texas. God love you.